You coming home after a long, exhausting day, only to find a heavy lock on your own pantry and your daughter-in-law smirking. That's to keep you out. What would you do? Well, I didn't get mad. I got even. And what happened next? Let's just say, by the end, her hands were shaking. You won't believe how this story ends, so don't even think about skipping ahead. You know those days when you feel like you've run a marathon, but all you've really done is wrangle a classroom full of teenagers who think they know everything? That was me last Thursday. I'd spent the whole day teaching, dodging spitballs, answering questions about why Shakespeare couldn't just text Juliet, and trying to keep my patience when the copier jammed for the third time before lunch. By the time the final bell rang, I was running on fumes and the promise of a quiet evening at home. All I wanted was to kick off my shoes, pour myself a cup of tea, and sneak a couple of those chocolate chip cookies I'd stashed behind the oatmeal. Don't judge. We all have our little secrets. Mine just happened to be covered in chocolate. So I walk in the door, drop my purse on the hall table, and head straight for the kitchen. I can practically taste those cookies already. But when I reach for the pantry door, I stop dead in my tracks. There, glinting in the late afternoon sun, is a brand new lock. Not just any lock, mind you. One of those heavy-duty padlocks you'd use to keep raccoons out of your trash cans, or maybe to secure a bike in downtown Chicago. For a second, I think I must be seeing things. Maybe I'm just tired. Maybe I've finally lost it after all these years of teaching. But no, it's real. My pantry is locked. I stand there, staring at it, my hand still hovering in midair. I'm trying to process what I'm seeing when, out of the corner of my eye, I spot Harper, my daughter-in-law, peeking around the corner. She's got that look on her face, the one that says she's just done something she thinks is clever. That's to keep you from touching our stuff, she says, her voice all sweet and smug. Like she's just solved world hunger or invented a calorie-free cheesecake. Now, let me tell you, I've dealt with a lot in my life. I've survived raising 2 boys, teaching high schoolers, and even a summer without air conditioning. But this was a new one. I could feel my blood pressure rising, my cheeks getting hot. For a split second, I considered losing my cool. I could have thrown a fit right there in the kitchen, demanded she take the lock off, or called my son Miles at work and given him an earful. But then I remembered something my own mother used to say. Never let them see you sweat. So instead, I just smiled. You know the smile I'm talking about, the one that says, "Bless your heart. You have no idea who you're dealing with." It's the same smile I used to give my boys when they thought they could sneak out after curfew without me noticing. Harper must have thought she'd won. She gave me a little nod, like she was proud of herself, and disappeared back into the living room. I stood there for a moment longer, staring at that lock. I could almost hear my cookies calling to me from behind the door. I thought about all the times I'd shared that pantry with my family, baking Christmas cookies, hiding Halloween candy, sneaking a midnight snack when I couldn't sleep. And now, suddenly, I was being treated like a guest in my own home. Or worse, like a child who couldn't be trusted around the sweets. I took a deep breath and tried to see things from Harper's perspective. Maybe she was feeling overwhelmed. Maybe she thought I was overstepping. Or maybe she just wanted to set some boundaries. But a lock on the pantry? That was a bit much. I mean, what did she think I was going to do? Eat all the flour? Make off with the canned beans? The whole thing was so ridiculous, I almost laughed. But instead, I just shook my head and went to put the kettle on. If I couldn't have cookies, at least I could have a cup of tea. As I waited for the water to boil, I started to think about what I should do next. Should I confront her? Should I call Miles and ask him what on earth was going on? Or should I just let it go and see how long she could keep this up? I'll admit, part of me wanted to march right back in there and demand my cookies. But another part of me, the part that's been teaching for 30 years and knows a thing or two about patience, decided to wait. After all, sometimes the best way to handle a situation is to let it play out. Besides, I've always believed that a little bit of humor can go a long way. So I sat down at the kitchen table, sipped my tea, and started to plot. Not revenge exactly, more like a lesson. Because if there's one thing I know, it's that you can't solve family problems with locks and keys. You solve them with conversation, understanding, and maybe a little bit of mischief. And as I sat there, I couldn't help but wonder, what would you do if someone locked you out of your own snacks? Scream? Cry? Or plot sweet, sweet revenge? Me? Well, let's just say the story was only getting started. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the faint glow of the streetlight sneaking through the curtains. I could hear the house settling, the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of Harper's laughter from the living room as she watched one of her reality shows. But all I could think about was that lock. Was I really being treated like a pantry bandit in my own home? The nerve! I mean, I've been called a lot of things in my life. Strict, stubborn, even a little too fond of my own cooking, but never a thief. I turned over, fluffing my pillow, but sleep wouldn't come. My mind kept replaying the moment I saw that lock, the way Harper's eyes sparkled with mischief, and the way she'd said, "That's to keep you from touching our stuff." Our stuff. As if I was some stranger, not the woman who'd spent years making this house a home. I thought about calling Miles, but what would I say? "Your wife locked me out of the pantry?" It sounded ridiculous, even to me. Besides, I could already hear his response. "Mom, just let it go. Harper's trying to set boundaries." Boundaries, my foot. There's a difference between boundaries and barbed wire. I sighed and stared at the ceiling, remembering something my own mother used to say. Never let them see you sweat. And never let them see you hungry. Wise words, especially when you're living with family. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't going to let a little thing like a lock get the best of me. After all, I'd survived teaching high schoolers for 3 decades. I'd seen it all, cheating, pranks, even a food fight or two. If I could handle that, I could handle Harper's little power play. So while she was out running errands, I decided it was time to put my teacher skills to work. You know the ones I mean. The skills that let you spot a cheater from across the room or open a child-proof cap with one hand while grading papers with the other. I stood in front of the pantry, eyeing the lock. It was sturdy, I'll give her that, but I've always believed that where there's a will, there's a way. I rummaged through the junk drawer, the one every family has, filled with old batteries, rubber bands, and a screwdriver or two. I found a set of tiny screwdrivers, the kind you use for eyeglasses, and got to work. It took a little patience, but I've got plenty of that. After a few minutes of fiddling, the lock popped open with a satisfying click. I couldn't help but smile. 30 years of teaching, and I still had it. But I didn't just want to remove the lock and pretend nothing happened. No, that wasn't my style. I wanted Harper to understand that this house was built on trust, not locks and keys. So I sat down at the kitchen table, pulled out a piece of my favorite stationery, the one with the little bluebirds in the corner, and started to write. Not a nasty note, but a lesson. Because sometimes the best way to teach respect is with a little bit of old-school wisdom. I wrote, "Dear Harper, I noticed the new lock on the pantry. I understand that sometimes we all need our space, but this house has always been about sharing, meals, stories, and yes, even snacks. If you ever feel like you need to talk, I'm here. But remember, I've been a teacher for 30 years. I know every trick in the book, and I wrote a few myself. P.S. The cookies are in the bread box. Good luck." I folded the letter neatly and placed it where the lock had been, right in the center of the pantry door. As I finished, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. I didn't want to hurt Harper's feelings, but I also couldn't let her think it was okay to treat me like an outsider. I thought about all the times I'd welcomed her into our family, the holidays we'd spent together, the laughter we'd shared over burnt pies and spilled gravy. Family isn't always easy, but it's worth fighting for. And sometimes fighting for it means standing up for yourself, even if it's just over a pantry lock. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I busied myself with chores, trying not to think about what would happen when Harper came home. Would she be angry? Embarrassed? Would she even understand what I was trying to say? I tried to distract myself by reorganizing the spice rack again, but my mind kept wandering back to that letter. I wondered if I'd done the right thing. Maybe I should have just let it go. Maybe I was making a mountain out of a molehill. But then I remembered all the times I'd told my students to stand up for themselves, to speak their truth, even when it was hard. If I couldn't do the same in my own home, what kind of example was I setting? As the sun began to set, I heard Harper's car pull into the driveway. My heart pounded in my chest as I listened to her footsteps in the hallway. She stopped in front of the pantry, and for a moment, there was only silence. Then the sound of paper unfolding. I held my breath, waiting for her reaction. Would she laugh? Cry? Storm into the kitchen demanding answers? I didn't know, but I did know one thing. I wasn't going to let a lock, or anything else, come between me and my family. Not now, not ever, and as I sat there sipping my tea, I realized that sometimes the best lessons aren't taught in classrooms. They're taught in kitchens, over cookies, and with a little bit of courage. The house was unusually quiet that afternoon, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're holding your breath without even realizing it. I busied myself in the kitchen, pretending to be deeply invested in reorganizing the spice rack for the third time that week. My hands moved the little jars of paprika and thyme, but my mind was elsewhere, hovering in the hallway, waiting for the sound of Harper's car in the driveway. I kept glancing at the clock, wondering if I'd done the right thing. Was the letter too much? Too little? Should I have just let the whole thing go and chalked it up to a bad day? But then I'd remember the look on her face when she'd locked me out of my own pantry, and I'd feel that little spark of resolve all over again. No, I told myself. This was about more than cookies. This was about respect, about family, about not letting a silly lock wedge itself between us. Finally, I heard the familiar crunch of tires on gravel. My heart did a little somersault as Harper's car door slammed shut. I could hear her footsteps, quick, purposeful, coming up the walk and through the front door. She didn't call out a hello, didn't ask how my day was. She went straight for the pantry, just as I knew she would. I stood at the kitchen counter, hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had long since gone cold, and listened as she stopped in front of the pantry door. There was a pause, a moment of confusion, as she realized the lock was gone. Then the soft rustle of paper as she found the letter I'd left in its place. I couldn't see her face from where I stood, but I could imagine it, the way her brow would furrow, the way her lips would press together as she read. I'd chosen my words carefully, wanting to make my point without being cruel. Dear Harper, I'd written, this house is built on trust, not locks. If you ever feel the need to keep me out, maybe we should talk about what's really bothering you. But remember, I've been a teacher for 30 years. I know every trick in the book, and I wrote a few myself. P.S. The cookies are in the bread box. Good luck. For a long moment there was only silence. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the distant chirp of a bird outside. Then, slowly, Harper stepped into the kitchen, letter in hand. Her face was pale, her hands trembling just a little. She looked at me, and for a split second, I saw something in her eyes that I hadn't seen before. Vulnerability, maybe, or regret. It was hard to tell. For a moment I almost felt bad, almost. But then I remembered how it had felt to be locked out of my own pantry, to be treated like a guest in my own home, and I stood my ground. Ever had a moment where you wanted to laugh and cry at the same time? That was me right then. Part of me wanted to burst out laughing at the absurdity of it all, the lock, the letter, the cookies hidden in the bread box like some kind of culinary treasure hunt. But another part of me wanted to cry, to mourn the fact that things had gotten to this point, that a simple misunderstanding had spiraled into a full-blown standoff. I took a deep breath and waited for Harper to speak. She opened her mouth, closed it again, then finally managed, I didn't think you'd actually take the lock off. Her voice was small, uncertain, nothing like the confident woman who'd installed that lock in the first place. I shrugged, trying to keep my tone light. Well, you know what they say. Never underestimate a woman with a screwdriver and a sweet tooth. Harper let out a shaky laugh, but her eyes were still fixed on the letter. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I felt like you were always in the kitchen, always. I don't know, taking over. I guess I just wanted a little space. I nodded, understanding more than she realized. I get it. Living together isn't always easy. We all need our space. But locks and secrets aren't the answer. If something's bothering you, talk to me. I promise, I'll listen. She looked down at the letter again, her fingers tracing the words. You really hid the cookies in the bread box? I grinned. Of course. You think I'd let a little lock keep me from my cookies? For the first time since she'd come home, Harper smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. The tension in the room eased, just a little, and I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Maybe we weren't going to solve all our problems in one afternoon. But this was a start. A small step toward understanding, toward rebuilding the trust that had been chipped away by locks and misunderstandings. We stood there for a moment, the silence between us no longer heavy, but comfortable. I thought about all the lessons I'd learned over the years, about patience, forgiveness, and the importance of speaking your truth. Sometimes, the hardest conversations are the ones that bring us closer together. Sometimes, a little old-school wisdom is exactly what's needed to break down the walls we build around ourselves. As Harper turned to leave the kitchen, she paused and looked back at me. "Thank you," she said softly, "for the letter and for not giving up on me." I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the tea. "Any time, sweetheart. Now go find those cookies before I eat them all myself." And just like that, the ice began to melt. Maybe, just maybe, we'd both learned something about trust, respect, and the power of a well-placed letter. The rest of that day passed in a strange tiptoe silence. Harper didn't say a word to me, and I didn't push. We moved around each other in the house like two cats who'd just had a spat, careful, cautious, each pretending to be busy with something else. I busied myself with laundry, folding towels with a little more force than necessary, and she retreated to her room, the door clicking shut behind her. I could hear the faint sound of her phone, maybe a podcast or a call to a friend, but I didn't eavesdrop. I figured we both needed a little time to let things settle. After all, sometimes the best thing you can do after a storm is just let the dust settle and see what's left standing. Dinner was a quiet affair. I made spaghetti her favorite and set the table for two. She came out, eyes a little red, but she didn't say anything about the letter or the lock. We ate in near silence, the only sounds the clink of forks and the occasional slurp of noodles. I wanted to say something to break the ice, but I didn't want to force it. I've learned over the years that sometimes you have to let people come to you in their own time. So I waited, and I hoped. It wasn't until later that night, when the house was dark and quiet, that Harper finally came to me. I was sitting in the living room, curled up with a book and a cup of chamomile tea, when I heard her footsteps in the hallway. She hesitated in the doorway, her silhouette framed by the soft glow of the lamp. I looked up, and for a moment, neither of us said a word. Then she crossed the room and sat down beside me, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I looked over and saw her eyes were watery, her cheeks flushed. I felt like you were taking over. The kitchen, the house, everything. I know it's silly, but I guess I just wanted to feel like I had some control." I set my book aside and reached over, giving her hand a gentle squeeze. "It's not silly," I said softly. "Living together isn't easy. We're both used to doing things our own way. It's natural to feel a little crowded sometimes, but you don't have to lock me out to get your space. Just talk to me. I promise I'll listen." She let out a shaky laugh, wiping at her eyes. "I know, I didn't know how to say it, and then it all just came out wrong." I smiled, remembering all the times I'd fumbled my own words, all the times I'd let pride or fear get in the way of saying what I really meant. "We all make mistakes," I told her. "The important thing is that we learn from them, and maybe hide the cookies a little better next time." That made her laugh for real, a warm, genuine sound that filled the room and made my heart ache with relief. The tension that had been hanging over us all day seemed to melt away, replaced by something softer, more forgiving. We sat there for a while just talking, about the house, about family, about how hard it can be to share your space and your life with someone else. She told me about her worries, her fears of not measuring up, of feeling like a guest in her own home. I listened, really listened, and shared some of my own stories, about moving in with my in-laws when I was her age, about the little battles and big lessons that come with blending families. Eventually, the conversation turned to lighter things. We laughed about the great pantry lock debacle, about my legendary hiding spots for snacks, and about the time I accidentally switched the salt and sugar in a batch of cookies, a story my sons still love to bring up at every family gathering. It felt good to laugh together, to remember that underneath all the drama and misunderstandings, we were still family. And then, as if on cue, Harper grinned and said, "So, are the cookies really in the bread box?" I winked. "You'll have to check and see. But you'd better hurry. I might have eaten the last one. She jumped up and dashed to the kitchen, and I followed, both of us giggling like schoolgirls. Sure enough, she found the cookies tucked away in the bread box, right where I'd said they'd be. We sat at the kitchen table, sharing the last few cookies and a glass of milk. And for the first time in days, everything felt right again. As we finished the cookies, Harper looked at me and said, "No more locks, okay?" I nodded. No more locks. Just a lot more understanding, and maybe a few more hiding spots for my snacks. We both laughed, and I realized that sometimes a little drama is just what a family needs to clear the air. It's not always easy, and it's certainly not always pretty, but it's real. And in the end, that's what matters most. That night, as I climbed into bed, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. The house was quiet, but it was a comfortable, contented quiet. No more secrets, no more locks, just the promise of a new day and the knowledge that whatever came next, we'd face it together. And maybe, just maybe, I'd find a new spot for my cookies, just in case. So, ladies, next time someone tries to lock you out of a pantry, a conversation, or even a dream, remember, you've got wisdom, wit, and a whole lot of life experience on your side. If you enjoyed this story, hit that subscribe button. Because trust me, I've got plenty more tales from the trenches of family life, and you won't want to miss a single one. What would you have done in my shoes? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories, laughs, and a little bit of sass.